Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at the Brazilian Pan-American premium battleship Atlantico. For this review, we'll start with some non-history, talk about the ship in game, go through the stats, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around though, check out the time codes down in the description. As for the non-history of the Atlantico, this is sometimes referred to colloquially as what might have happened if the Brazilian Navy had leaned away from the Rio de Janeiro and had instead leaned towards the Riachuelo. That's only slightly true. In the South American naval arms race of the early 20th century, Brazil very much wanted to be seen as a major player on the world stage. It also did not want to fall behind its regional rivals, which were Argentina and Chile, both of which were developing blue water navies, including dreadnoughts. Within the Brazilian Navy, though, there were two schools of thought on how dreadnought development should continue following the Minas Gerais class of battleships. The Minister of the Navy, Admiral Joaquim Marques Batista de Leon, who we will lovingly refer to as Batista, preferred a larger number of smaller main battery artillery. On the other side of the argument was Admiral Duarte Hueche de Becelar Pinto Guedes, who we will call Basilar, who was a proponent of arming ships with a smaller number of guns as large as they could get them, potentially up to 16 inches. When Batista was put into office, he was quoted as having said that new battleships should not be built on exaggerated lines such as have not yet stood the test of experience, which is a curious statement for a man born when wood ships with sails were still the norm, but presumably he got this notion from Kaiser Wilhelm II, the apparently very charismatic German leader. In any case, Batista favored a design with 14 12-inch guns, which was to be named Rio de Janeiro. Basilar probably preferred a battleship recorded in history as Riachuelo. Conway's All the World's Fighting Ships list 4 potential designs for this, but there are at least 10 other variations of the design. Project 781 was expected to become the Riachuelo, but that it can be called a project probably hints to this never got built. Project 781 very much resembled something that would have had capabilities similar to a Queen Elizabeth battleship or Revenge-class battlecruiser, with most likely 8 15-inch guns and a relatively traditional secondary battery consisting of casemate-mounted 6-inch guns and a handful of early 3-inch AA guns. The similarity there not being all that surprising considering the British designer Tennyson d'Agincourt designed all 3 of them. Almost everything else we'll talk about in this video, and even some ships for Brazil's regional rivals. Obviously though, that's not Atlantico. Instead, this design seems to suppose that the Brazilian Navy would have taken a step backwards after World War I and ordered something closer to the earlier considerations for the Project 680s. The reasons that these ships were never built is manyfold. Here are a few of them. The Brazilian economy took a dive. The collapse of the coffee and rubber prices actually was one of the reasons why Rio de Janeiro was sold initially to Turkey and eventually seized by England, where she would serve as HMS Agincourt. The Navy suffered a very substantial revolt in 1910, so maybe not the best idea to give the Navy even more weapons to play with. Brazil did not have the capacity to build a super dreadnought themselves, and following World War I, treaties disallowed the sale of battleships to other countries. And that same reason also extends to Argentina and Chile, who also could not continue the arms race for similar reasons. Probably the closest design I could find historically to this was Project 686, which included 8 16-inch guns and 3 turrets, which included each 2 9.4-inch artillery, and then your usual arrangement of 6-inch casement guns. Looking at the profile of the ships, you can see some similarities, though you'd have to remember that the turret amidships is actually a 9.4-inch gun turret. Project 686 was the only design of the dozens of designs created in 1910 that was put forward by someone other than d'Agincourt. Instead, it was the brainchild of Admiral Bachelard. According to the Navy historian David Topless, the former curator of the British National Maritime Museum and not the rugby player, it was probably the most outrageous dreadnought ever proposed. Granted, this was still a few years before Senator Benjamin Tillman would say hold my beer to that, but Project 686 was the only design that incorporated such large caliber secondary battery guns. The relative outrageousness of the design is probably largely a result of an admiral's personal dream. In any case, that's 6 9.4-inch guns rather than 16 9.2-inch guns. So you can probably add to the list of reasons why Atlantico was never built that it is a completely daffy design. The one sensible thing going on here is switching out the 9.4-inch guns, which I don't think exist at the time, in England anyway, for relatively similar 9.2-inch guns. Brazil had already the Armstrong BL 9.2-inch gun in service on coastal defense ships like the Diodore and Floriano. They were modern weapons, and it really wouldn't have made a lot of sense to spend some extra time developing a new gun and maintaining the logistics for a shell only 0.2 of an inch wider. And the rest of what you see on the Atlantico is portraying a refit around 1940 in the United States. As for the name Atlantico, that is probably deriving itself from the current flagship of the Brazilian Navy, formerly known as HMS Ocean. Atlantico is the first Pan-American ship in World of Warships Legends, which probably hints at more things to come. It's certainly unique, but it has some downsides. We'll come to that in a moment. First, let's talk about what makes this ship kind of fun. Well, it's the same thing that makes this visually striking. It's obvious. It's all of those oversized guns on the side. They shoot far, and if they hit, they do a good amount of damage. Now, the reload is a little slow, so overall damage over time doesn't look great, but with 234 millimeters, they tend to have less problems penetrating whatever they hit. The Atlantico also has some pretty good armor, with a solid main belt, a relatively well-armored deck, and a spaced, submerged citadel protected by a beefy turtleback. Those words basically describe French citadels on ships like Richelieu, which is a good thing to be compared to because Atlantico's values are, at least on paper, definitely better. On the downside, if the Atlantico does take damage, she doesn't have a lot of hit points and will find her way out of the game relatively quickly. Your large secondary turrets also are pretty prone to being knocked out. This may be because they are simply bigger and easier to hit, but it also may be that it's easier to notice when they're messed up since they're bigger than most cruisers' main batteries. The ship is also painfully slow, same speed as the Kansas, but at least you can understand why a ship with a dozen 16-inch guns may not get around all that fast. That really limits what you can do or where you can go in this thing if you're hoping to participate in the game. So you'll need to count on your teammates to create crossfires, and you'll need them. That's largely related to this last bullet point here, which is that there isn't much to do on this ship, in part because it doesn't really have a lot of consumables, and in part because you don't even have to, or get to, manage what kind of shells you're going to be shooting. AP only means this ship struggles even more so with well-angled ships with armor, and can only, at best, overpen things with no armor whatsoever. I might add that the ship currently has no decent commander choices for it. You get access to Pedro so-and-so, but he has a good number of skills that have absolutely no use on this ship whatsoever, some stuff that is okay, I guess, and a couple of decent skills. He's also not a real person, so I don't feel at all bad for forgetting his name all the time, in spite of his stately facial hair. The good news to end this is we've been promised another battleship commander coming in the future. I assume that means sooner rather than later, but there's no guarantee on when that will be. We've also been told the commander will be well suited to Atlantico, and you can make of that what you will. In the end, this means Atlantico is kind of a ship where you buy it now and maybe enjoy it later, hopefully. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to size up this ship. British 15-inch guns are kind of a known quantity. If you like the Vanguard and sit on AP the whole time, this should sort of feel similar. But you don't have reload boosters or kind of anything else to do other than slowly maneuver around the map. If you're really into secondary ships, you can consider it, because the base range is good and the size of the artillery is pretty hilarious, but I'm not going to recommend it, particularly with the continued penalty to XP and credits applied to secondary damage within Legends. As we come to stats, survivability on Atlantico is pretty good. The ship does have about 5,500 HP less than most battleships at tier 7, but it has a very nice armor model. Short story is she has 32 millimeters on her extremities, and it's a very tough 51 millimeters on its deck around the middle of the ship. Most incoming shells will be bounced upwards into your superstructure, which is thankfully fairly minimal, especially from the front. I wouldn't complain about the 356 millimeter belt, though it's not great, because you have a beefy 152 millimeter upper belt, and once you strip away these layers, it's protecting a virtually French-like black hole level of citadel, protected both with a 51 millimeter turtleback and a citadel that is beneath the waterline, and topped off by a 90 millimeter upper plate. Basically, if you get citadeled in this thing, it's probably a Musashi through your bow or stern, or maybe the universe is giving you a subtle hint that it hates you. Add to that the 31% torpedo reduction, just a skosh above average, and I'd say Atlantico's survivability is certainly acceptable. When we're looking at Atlantico's main battery, you have 10 guns, 15-inch each, and 5 turrets. Annoyingly, these slightly favor the kiting position, slightly against the armor model, but otherwise you have very good angles both forward and to the rear of the ship. The range, just 16.4, is low, and on the odd chance that the commander that we've been promised improves the range, it's still not going to be very good. These things are the shortest range of any main battery guns at tier 7 for a battleship. You have no HE, so you can't burn damage control parties for either your team or your own secondary array. Instead, you have to shoot AP. With only 10,700 damage, you're definitely below average and do about 1,800 points less per shell than Vanguard. As far as I'm aware, there are no special characteristics, so consider aiming carefully. What could be a real treat is the secondary array, which features 10 5-inch guns and more importantly 16 9.2-inch guns arranged in 4 twin turrets per side. These have a decently long 12.5 second reload, but have a 21% fire chance, which is kind of nutty. Unfortunately, they seem to get taken out a lot, so the ship can remain an object of perpetual sadness. All of this has a very nice 7.5 kilometer range though, so if you can beef this thing up in the future, you'll be able to do some silly things, but the 9.2-inch guns have very slow shell arcs and may find it difficult to hit things with high maneuverability. But the smaller guns are American, so they do tend to land fairly regularly. The AA on Atlantico is nothing special. This 76 rating is on the low side of average, reflecting some sort of American upgrade that was never realized on a fictional ship. Most of this is mid-range, so she's not a great escort ship, in part because she's slower than every ship that can sail next to her, but also because the DPM doesn't really get good until you get inside 3.5 kilometers. Atlantico's maneuverability is pretty tragic. She lacks the firepower of the similarly snail-like Kansas. She also turns 100 meters wider than Kansas, though her rudder is not all that bad. She is, however, one of the most concealed battleships at the tier. From my experience with Zeton, the only stealthier battleship, that doesn't mean folks are going to be able to get stealth secondaries, but it does get you closer to secondary range before you have to engage. Then finally, consumables are nothing special. You have a battleship damage control party, 3 standard heals, and a secondary targeting consumable. There's really no trick to any of these other than that it might actually make more sense to target slower ships at medium or long range before anything else with your secondary array, just because you're unlikely to hit smaller, faster, or more maneuverable ships. And this ship currently offers you a lot more time to think about these things than perhaps other ships in the game, just because there's really nothing else to do. Okay, and with all that out of the way, we're going to be on Two Brothers. There we have the Atlantico. And as we jump into this game, I'll put a brief caveat out there at the beginning. Because this ship is slow, and it's going to take me a bit of time to get into the fight, I didn't play the ship as much as most. There's not that much to do, and there's not much to test, and at times, I was extremely poor. At one point, having less than 300,000 credits during this update. This ship probably can work with an alternative battleship commander, but it's hard to tell whether we'll get one and when exactly that will be. My build here is with Pedro, who is a halfway house of bad ideas. To rationalize it, this is playing an average, and I'm pretty sure average in this ship is bad. But to go through each one of these choices, too many of you play carriers. Why not? This ship is too slow. It has no range. Infinite HP is nice. So let's see if we can make the main battery work while I'm alive. Whatever. Please don't shoot me while I shoot you more. We've got a little bit extra going on in terms of secondary battery and accuracy in terms of our commanders. That's great. Okay, we're already shooting. I've lied. Whatever. So anyway, you can see I'm nosing towards the middle of the map. The reason why I'm nosing towards the middle of the map is more or less because if I play the outside, I could just drive there, not get to shoot at anything, and never be able to really contribute at the game at all. So like an American standard class battleship that has like a not dissimilar speed, sometimes it makes a lot of sense in Atlantico just to sail towards the middle of the map and hope that your team will create the crossfires for you. You can be the inside angle. Unfortunately, as we're shooting at like this Asitaka, there's not a lot of chance I'm going to do much. We do have 25,000 damage so far, so it's not like the end of the world or anything like that. But you can see I'm looking at the Ashitaka. I'm also considering that there's a destroyer. I am the type of player who would normally shoot at the destroyer. Having only AP though, sometimes I choose not to. AP in this ship isn't bad in terms of pen or anything like that. It doesn't seem catastrophically unusable. It is a little bit predictable since you don't have a choice. I'm not exactly burning the world down with my accuracy here. That's not exactly my fault. I think those shells were relatively decently aimed. You get a good grouping there. You still get 3 pens and nothing special. But you can see we're up to 49,000 damage. We haven't really taken a bunch of damage in return. We're doing pretty well against Ashitaka. It's down a tier. Whatever. That's fine. Finally land a nice juicy citadel there. And with this last shot, we should take him out. Now that we're reversing, we're going to go ahead and try to line up on the North Carolina. We don't really have a good outside angle yet, but it looks like he's feeling unsupported. I will have enough time probably to reload before he gets a shot on me, but I'm a little bit more concerned about things that are pretty close to me. Now I'm going to offer him a big broadside at this point, as I turn completely around in order to deal with this Bismarck. Obviously this is a bit of an unpredictable driving pattern because you can see the torpedoes come in there on the left or the right. I mean, it was at one point the left and then it was the right, I guess. And now we have a Bismarck that's come through the middle. We're up to 85,000 damage after a couple of secondary hits. And I do mean exactly a couple of secondary hits. So most of this work that we're doing right now is with our main battery. Secondaries on this are fun. I think if this had access to Porcupine, and if I were using secondary mod in slot 1, it would be hilariously awesome. Not maybe effective, and you definitely make a lot less money, and you get a lot less XP, just because right now in Legends there is a penalty applied to your XP, and your XP is related to how much money you're going to make per game. So that's kind of unfortunate. But with the main battery, you can see, like, if we have people who are giving us broadsides, this thing can slap plenty hard. We're not really doing a lot of critical damage, hitting citadels. Against German ships, you probably don't expect it. But against almost anything else, you at least have a decent chance. We're going to start to turn around again. You can see we're down to just the 1 heal. We're going to go ahead and use that just to try to recover some of our HP. We're still burning, in part because we're still spotted. And if we're still spotted, then there's a pretty good chance that somebody can shoot a torpedo at us. Since I have been paying attention to battleships, I have no idea where that torpedo could come from. So I'm going to wait until I feel like I have at least some cover from that island and enough spotting from that battleship to go ahead and use that. We still haven't lost our spot. We're starting to turn in. This is natural TacticAngel stuff. I hate sailing away from the battle, and I hate the situation that's about to happen to our team. We are up a whole bunch of ships, but I am a little bit concerned about going down 3 caps to 1. That'll give the enemy team 6 points every 6 seconds or so, and you know, that's not great. That's not great. We're hitting just about the max speed that you can expect to get out of this thing. I think if you really built for speed, you could get it in the high 20s. I mean, we're above 26. We're almost at 27 when we started to make our turn there. But you can imagine if you built straight on for speed, you're probably going to be just a little bit below 30. That's kind of a sad time. I know I gave this a little bit of a hard time in comparison to Kansas. If this had a real battleship commander, it would be more fun to play than Kansas, almost certainly. Just because, well, I should say, for me it would be more fun if I had a secondary commander. Just because it gives me a little bit more to do. I'm a little tankier. I enjoy taking damage. People are going to shoot at me. I have a recognizable name. It has its advantages from time to time, but usually it's annoying. Moving into D, you can see we've already made sure that somebody isn't capping A, and by we I mean really someone else. And I'm more or less just here to block the cap. The sad realization is I'm probably never going to see the destroyer that can torpedo me. So I really just need to make sure that my driving is erratic enough that he doesn't hit me. We have slowed down. We're now speeding up. Depending on when or if he shoots those torpedoes, that could mean any number of things. But that last salvo finally does finish off the North Carolina. We cap the base back. And at this point, I think the slow realization is that I'm probably not going to be able to contribute a whole lot more towards the game. And the things that are passing me right now have the potential of doing quite a bit of damage to me. And maybe handing over the points that I could grant to the enemy to that enemy, which is about 100 points for a battleship right now. So we're gonna go ahead and turn out here a little bit. And that's mostly just because I might want to create a really fantastic review or something, but I would much rather the people who are playing with me actually get to win the game and enjoy themselves most of the time. Not all the time, most of the time. So closing thoughts on Atlantico. I mean, the design is obviously totally insane. You've got a Cheshire plus an extra turret on each side of this ship, and you have no control over those guns. So, whatever. When those hit, you can actually see yourself doing a decent amount of damage. That said, easily, it seems to be a bad idea to release this without a proper battleship commander. If you let me put a battleship commander on this, assuming it's not anything other than something totally unexpected, I'd imagine that I'd have a lot more fun with it, whether it's an accuracy commander or a survivability commander. I would prefer survivability, personally. But if this isn't the first time you've seen one of my videos, that's not unexpected. We weren't promised 2 commanders though, and we still only have 1 battleship commander for Pan-European battleships and Pan-Asian cruisers, so if I were really worried about the money involved in a Tier 7 premium and I have a preferred playstyle, it would be worth waiting. After that, if you like a lot of tools, this ship's got basically nothing going for it. Once you get past that, it's got pretty good angles. It has occasionally funny secondary batteries when they don't get destroyed. This ship could work, but I can't guarantee it with any sort of certainty. So I'm going to end the video here. This one took a lot of effort to try to research Brazilian ships. I hope you've enjoyed the video though, and as always, hope to see you on the next one.